Our next agenda is we're giving to our speaker, and John Augustine is the one to introduce him.
Did I get some? Stay still. I was thinking you were asking me to take a picture. No, I need a few of yours. You're going to be up next, John. Oh, I say that's Jerry.
All right, just before I give my remarks, I just want to add that LEA is an all-volunteer grassroots organization. And not only our reports, but the banquet here tonight is a product of people donating their time and talents. We have a videographer here doing it for much less than cost. We have another one who came from Duluth who's doing it for free. We have a photographer who's donating his services. And we have had a wonderful experience at this our venue here for the first time here at Jimmy's Event Center. And they were very reasonable in negotiation for pricing and options as well. So I want to thank the staff here for that. And with that, I can move on to introducing the keynote speaker. So, I realize a few of you tonight knew of this distinguished gentleman who has come here to visit with us and speak at our banquet. But for a lot of you, the question first made famous by Ross Perot's running mate is in order. Who is John Gizzzi and why is he here? He doesn't have the name recognition of a famous politician or even a syndicated commentator, although his latest job with Newsmax likely has made him a more recognizable face when out in public than he was for most of his career. He's a husband, a man of faith, who has amassed a treasure trove of stories and wisdom while building a long career covering politics, not only in our nation's capital, but also outside the United States and in states across the nation. Once you come into contact with him, he's an unforgettable character. Could make for an interesting book someday when he finally dials back his coverage of daily political events. Who else in journalism fills his Twitter feed with 50-year-old historical parallels to current events and dresses as if he belongs in one of those classic movies that have been colorized? Through his long involvement with internships arranged by the National Journalism Center, he has met a mentor to many others who sought roles in journalism, including myself. Let me take you to a time, the summer of 1992, that's more than 15 years ago by then, where I first worked with John Gizzzi. My wife, Monica, and my daughter, Amanda, who are here tonight, can only imagine what it was like. After participating in some Leadership Institute programs, a few small political jobs, and doing some writing for a small college newspaper, I was accepted into the National Journalism Center's summer internship program. NJC was founded by conservative journalists and specialized in giving students who are not journalism majors the training and hands-on experience to pursue jobs in the media. The interns lived together in housing a few blocks from Capitol Hill, received a small stipend to help with basic living expenses, and were placed with a variety of media companies around the Beltway. The intern house had one small TV and a community car that people used at their own risk to get basic groceries or go where mass transit did not. You could see the cord sticking out of the tires. No one put more than a few dollars of gas in at a time because any day could be the last for that car. One time, a couple of us had to push it half a block to a gas station after being in the car for less than a mile. Some housemates got to work at CNN. There was no Fox or Newsmax yet, much less any online-only conservative news sites. Another of my housemates, Raymond Arroyo, got his start interning as a researcher for the Evans and Novak syndicated column, before eventually becoming a news anchor for EWTN and a published author. Joe Hainfelder was in the same housemate as I was too. He worked in human events offices as a position of copy editor, a position that may soon be declared an endangered species, unfortunately. I got to work at a national conservative newspaper, Human Events, with John Gizzzi and the rest of the gang there. Every workday, this native, cold weather loving Minnesotan would sweat through my formal attire while walking to and from the transit stops to the building where Human Events was. often dodging a few panhandlers while I was carrying a briefcase who foolishly thought just because I was formally dressed I had a lot of money to throw around. I already do some basic research skills from my experience in debate, politics, and school newspapers. Human Events, which was much different than the site that goes by the name of Human Events today, taught me how to deal with different people to find and print information that would interest their readership. The central characters in Human Events offices had a variety of styles and backgrounds. People smoked. Those of us who didn't weren't obsessed with banning them from doing so. Christian, Jewish, different races and ethnicities. No one there seemed to be staking claims to knowledge through identity politics. People brought their various backgrounds and talents together to provide the best product for their readership and to the company as a whole. Editor Alan Riskin's office was stacked high with reports from various agencies and organizations. He would dig through them and come up with some remarkable news stories. I learned, my family could probably tell you this, perhaps too well, that you didn't have to have a tidy work environment to do the job. At the other end of the style spectrum was John Gizzzi, who seemed to be always engaged in conversations to flesh out his stories. He became known for the amazing size and range of his Rolodex of sources, which he would go back to years after first being in contact with them. I learned that it wasn't intimidating when working for a newspaper to interview high-profile people, such as the mayor of Miami, Florida, or the #2 person at Geffen Records, as long as you were prepared, asked fair questions, and respected their time. They're people just like anyone else. I was happy to be a source of information when John chose to write about Minnesota politics long after my internship ended. If for no other reason than to counter the line that Ben Weber and like-minded operatives were always trying to feed him. It even led me to getting a Human Events byline in 2009 with a profile of Tim Pawlenty when he began exploring the presidential run. John Gizzzi helped get that published. We made an effort to stay in touch over the years. Finally, after a few years of discussion, John agreed to come to the political and media wilderness of Minnesota to support LEA with its unique and important mission and to share his well-formed insights and vast knowledge with a population that deserves greater exposure to him. And so now, without further ado, I present to you on behalf of LEA, John Gizzzi.
Thank you, John, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Before I begin my remarks, I just have to say I am awestruck by the crowd, and I only wish with all my heart that there were 2 people here who could not be here tonight, my mom and dad. Mom made it to 92, Dad to 97, because they would have most appreciated John's warm and poignant remarks. I think my mother would have been impressed, and my father would have been amazed. So thank you. If my voice sounds a little gruff or a little rough tonight, I hope you'll pardon me. I came in on a flight last night that was so small, the pilot had to radio in to ask what time it was. The surprising answer he got from the tower was, well, what airline are you flying on? The pilot says, well, what does that have to do with the time? To which the tower responded, if you're with American Airlines or United Airlines, it's 8 o'clock. If you're with BOAC or Air France, it's 0800 hours. If you're with Southwest Airlines, the big hand's on the 12 and the little hand's on the 7. It's a special treat to be here in Minnesota tonight. I think a lot of us who cover politics love Minnesota because you've given us the colorful and the men and women of certainty and consequence. Look back at your history for generations. Floyd Olson, governor of Minnesota, the Bernie Sanders of his day. Harold Stassen, the boy governor, who by 1 year, by being elected at age 31, kept the title of youngest governor in the U.S. from 32-year-old Bill Clinton of Arkansas. And of course, Hubert Humphrey, Gene McCarthy, and Walter Mondale all were major players in the national political scene. And the first 2 women sent to the House from each major party, who were Minnesotans, were also women of consequence. Democrat Koya Knudsen, elected in 1954, and a friend of many here, Republican Michelle Bachmann. And of course, more recently, we've seen the elections of Paul Wellstone, another precursor of Bernie Sanders, of Al Franken, Jesse Ventura, and most recently, Congresswoman Ilhan Abdullahi Omar. Very simply put, it's a pleasure to come here because one thing for a political reporter that he or she can say about Minnesota, it's never boring here. Now, I do have to say a word of thanks to John Augustine. It is true, he was our intern at Human Events, and he was rock solid then, and he's rock solid today. We have made an effort to keep in touch, and he's been invaluable helping me over the years. When I would say someone was conservative who didn't meet his high standards, he would call me and in his own shy and retiring way would say, "You're wrong." So I'm very grateful for John. Thank you all. Now, before I begin my remarks as a White House correspondent, let me also give an observation to you. All of us, small businessmen, people who run their own business, people like John Spry who teach, others here know that change is apparent and in a very rapid way in all that we do for livelihood. I certainly have seen change as a reporter. When I was a kid, I hated people who said when I was a kid. Now I say it all the time. When I was a young reporter, I sent in stories on a manual typewriter. And for those of you not familiar with it, let me share a definition from my old friend, Lynn Nossiger, an old copy reporter before he joined Ronald Reagan's team. A typewriter combines the functions of a word processor and a printer. Now, it is inarguable that I've benefited from learning the computer, from having a laptop, from going to a primarily print publication to one that has strong roots being online. It's been more exposure for me and the stories that I like to bring to the attention of the public. But at the same time, I can't help but recall the words of Chief Justice Charles Evans Hughes, that change simply for the sake of change is change without merit. Let me give you a case in point, and it's something that I wrestle with every day. Is it good to simply rush a story and put it online without double checking and getting that all-important second source, all in the name of collecting the almighty clicks on the story posted? And frankly, is it good to simply have anonymous sources for a story, as important and probative as it is, without having at least one name identified? And finally, with the net, we can all read just what we want. Is it good to put together our own little electronic newspaper with stories we agree with and pundits we side with, and thus avoid dissenting opinions, and in the process just lead to an echo chamber around ourselves, which leads to a divisive body politic? These are things that I think we should all think about and consider. With that, welcome to the Trump administration. Now, Donald Trump is somebody that I first met in 2013 when he was just thinking about running for president. I've had 2 private, off-the-record sessions with him in the White House, and I'm proud to say that he usually calls on me when he's boarding Marine One and faces the 4th estate at the White House. Just some thoughts on him and the press. First of all, it is said that he's a vengeful and vindictive person. That's not true at all. In fact, a little known story is how after the impeachment debacle, he contacted Adam Schiff, Nancy Pelosi, and Jerry Nadler and asked them to go on a high-level fact-finding mission to Wuhan, China. Andrew, I thought you'd appreciate that. Now, the president is someone who would tell you if he was here that he's answered more questions and had more give-and-take with reporters than any president in history. Well, what he means is taking the questions from folks like me at the helicopter or in the Oval Office after he introduces a world leader with whom he's had a meeting. Now, he may well be right for one term. I have a funny feeling with 4 terms, FDR had a few more exchanges with reporters at the time. But what this does has simply replaced the very familiar press briefing that one used to see every day on television. Those briefings were a staple of the White House since 1933. They were televised for the first time in 1996. And at the time of their cancellation in 2019, they were actually beating Jeopardy and Young and the Restless in the ratings in public. They were a staple of Americana. Now, do most of us who cover the White House miss them and miss the opportunities for follow-up questions after and to have the Q&A and the give and take with the president's top spokesman televised? You bet we are. And I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Someone else who is Sarah Sanders. She was just hitting her stride as the president's top spokesman, and indeed, she was getting much better at jousting with Jim Acosta every day. And then the president pulled the plug on it. Or, as she would say, someone with a higher pay grade had the last word. Now, please don't take my word for it. Ask her that when she comes to Minnesota in April, or read her book. Now, this is a president, and this is an administration that feels it doesn't need press briefings. The president thinks he's his own best spokesman. And in fact, there is a case for this. He feels that way because of Twitter. Let it be said that Donald Trump is to Twitter what FDR was to radio and Jack Kennedy was to television. He's put it on the political map. And quite frankly, we all saw last week how Attorney General Barr said, and I quote, "It's impossible for me to do my job because of the president's tweets." Now, the president didn't reprimand him, didn't make a cutting comment, didn't fire him. He's heard it all before. Privately, between us, a past chief of staff to President Trump told me he went to the president and said, "If only you would stop tweeting, your face would be on the $20 bill someday." Well, he didn't, and he won't. And let me just go back to a joint press conference that President Trump had with German Chancellor Angela Merkel in 2017. He was asked point blank, did he regret any of the tweets that he had unleashed on the public? And he said, not many of them, because without Twitter, I wouldn't be standing before you today. Now, I had a wise editor who told me once that receipts are a reporter's best friend. In Trump world, leaks are a reporter's best friend. That's right. Most of the major stories you read about, ranging from the appointment of the 2 Supreme Court justices to the recent speculation that the president favors a tax break and tax incentive for people who invest in the stock market. All of those originate with a high administration source or a senior administration official, hence the leaks. And quite frankly, this reporter speaks with experience on leaks. At a time when the Secretary of Labor held a press conference to insist that controversy notwithstanding, he was going to stay exactly where he was. Sources high in the Labor Department said he would be gone soon. And he was gone soon, 3 days, in fact, after he had the press conference to argue the contrary. When the speculation began that White House Chief of Staff John Kelly was going to leave his position, a high-level source told me, ignore the speculation about Governor Chris Christie or Nick Ayers, Chief of Staff to the Vice President, as his successor. The next Chief of Staff would be Nick Mulvaney, Director of the Office of Management and Budget. And sure enough, that happened a short time later. I might add that my source came to me in the men's room of the Marriott Marquis Hotel in Washington to share this secret. Now, it is said that all leakers in the White House are equal, but some are more equal than others. Witness the case of Anonymous. I'm sure you've heard about the book that's come out by a high-level official working in the White House. It really doesn't reveal anything that we didn't know already, but it certainly bothers a lot of people, including numero uno, that someone is writing a book while on the White House payroll. And I can tell you, Anonymous will be known to the public, and she will be gone from her position quite soon. Just keep that in mind. Now, let me conclude with a little mention about Donald Trump himself and policy, or as John Augustine used to call it, the substance. The fact is that policy is critical to this administration. And to discuss Donald Trump without discussing his policies would be like, casting the first act of Hamlet without the gravediggers. This is a president who, if you try to compare him to any past president in American history, you won't be able to do it. In order to find an accurate comparison, one has to go across the Atlantic. And the person who most resembles him is one Silvio Berlusconi, the multi-billionaire communications magnate in Italy, owner of a winning soccer team, and someone who came to the office of Prime Minister 4 times and never held office before. Does it sound familiar? Like Donald Trump, Berlusconi came from a comfortable family background, and he turned that comfortable family fortune into a multi-billion-dollar colossus. He was a colorful character, and just as Donald Trump was known in New York as the Donald, Silvio Berlusconi was known throughout Rome as Il Cavaliere, the Knight. Both men had made multiple trips to the altar and made no secret of their pride in being called ladies' men. And both, interestingly, while having an overall conservative record, are willing to apply a treatise from the business world that if something different is going to work, then try it, just so long as it works. Berlusconi, for example, surprised a lot of people during his first mandate as prime minister when he ended conscription for the Italian military. Donald Trump totally leaves Medicare and Social Security off the table. In other words, the two biggest causes of the deficit are not addressed by the administration because he knows that that third rail is going to be electric. Now, when you look at the rest of his policies, if you insist on trying to compare him to an American politician, one has to go back a few years and look at someone who ran for president and didn't make it. That's Pat Buchanan, who ran a quarter of a century ago. In his most successful run for president, he laid out the groundwork for a manifesto that, for the most part, was adopted by Donald Trump. In other words, Pat Buchanan's legacy is Donald Trump's agenda. The obvious case in point is using trade as a weapon to get other countries to go along with one's policy. And certainly the President's emphasis on changing the judiciary to the point of outsourcing judicial nominees to the Heritage Foundation and to the Federalist Society comes right from the book of Buchanan. Pat Buchanan, in fact, in his last book, devotes a whole chapter to his belief that the Nixon administration he served so loyally totally dropped the ball in the selection of judges, including at the level of the Supreme Court. And of course, what we call today the border wall, or Trump's border wall, was a quarter century ago the Buchanan fence. And what was Pat Buchanan's slogan when he ran for president? America first. And there's one other change in Donald Trump that's almost a seismic change in foreign policy. Under the last two presidents, encouraging countries that the United States dealt with to become democratic was not only a high priority, it was an imperative. George W. Bush said as much in his second inaugural address in 2005. Barack Obama, in his now celebrated and storied Cairo speech of June 4th, 2009, said that, not only emphasizing democracy in the Middle East, but women's rights and religious liberties as well. Donald Trump doesn't address things in such lofty terms. In fact, his bottom line is, if a country is going to work with the United States, that it can do whatever it wants on the domestic front. Hence, there's been minimal criticism of Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, even after the bloody death of the journalist Khashoggi. The president says next to nothing critical, and in fact praises Fattah el-Sisi, the president of Egypt, a diametric contrast to the approach that Barack Obama took to Hosni Mubarak, the strongman president of Egypt 10 years ago, and thus ignited the Arab Spring. And let me share with you a story in foreign policy that's little known but poignant. Last Easter, the president jolted official Washington when he had a long and very warm telephone call with Libyan Field Marshal Khalifa Haftar. Now, that name may not mean a lot to you. Marshal Haftar controls most of the country of Libya with his headquarters in Benghazi. He is a former chief of staff to Colonel Gaddafi and someone who is openly contemptuous of democracy. And what is interesting is he now seeks to overthrow through civil war the government in Tripoli of Prime Minister Fayez el-Sarraj, who is backed, on paper at least, by the United States, the European Union, and the United Nations. What one wonders is the president doing talking to the sworn enemy of someone the U.S. supports? The answer lies with his then National Security Advisor, John Bolton, who believes that someone who is a strongman is the person best equipped to deal with the militias and with the American-hating Islamists. Now, I can tell you this. Newsmax broke the story that Bolton arranged the phone call. I will not say where that source was that gave that story to us. In fairness to President Trump, his overall record, as I said, is conservative and one all conservatives could be proud of. 67 executive orders mandating deregulation in business and industry. A budget, a Tax and Jobs Act, rather, that not only generated and jump-started the economy, but actually removed the mandates required by the Affordable Care Act and set up the stage for another court test of Obamacare. And the new budget that has just come out, which, while not tackling entitlements, performs strong vivisection on many of the big spending projects, the pork barrel that we all hear about in departments such as the Environmental Protection Agency, AmeriCorps, and the Department of Education. Also, Donald Trump is a conservative, but it's not your father's conservatism. I think of a call recently I had to make to American Express to work out a dispute in my bill, and I learned that I'd reached a service manager in Manila in the Philippines. Now, I've been following their president, President Duterte, who is an anti-establishment figure, profane, and totally unpredictable. That's some president you have there, I told the serviceman. He replied, that's some president you have there. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a very nice evening for me, very moving, and it's been a pleasure to get to know you. We've got some important days ahead, and for the lawmakers here, days of uncertainty. But as the Peruvian Nobel laureate Mario Vargas Llosa once said, uncertainty is a flower whose petals have yet to be picked. We don't know what the future will bring, but we know that no matter what defeats come, people like Eric and like John and Jeff and so many others are going to press forward, knowing in their hearts that Cicero was right when he said politics is not static. If the good times must come to an end, so must the bad times. As I leave you, let me leave you with some words from a poet, Nguyen Tri Chien. He was from Vietnam, and for years he used his powers of verse, his mastery of sarcasm and humor to challenge the communist regime. For his trouble, he was sentenced to 27 years in prison, and there he went, tortured to the limit of human endurance, forced to endure hard labor beneath the Southeast Asian sun, and denied even a pencil and paper with which to write his verse down. But he had a far more potent tool for recalling and committing verse, his memory. When he was finally released, he wrote down all he had committed to memory, 400 poems and verses. He put them on little paper, and he stuffed them within his underclothing and his suit. And then he went to the British Embassy in Hanoi. He began to act like a fool, throwing water in people's face, turning over tables, until he was finally arrested. And the British sentries then searched him, and they found the papers. They knew just what to do. They sent them in a diplomatic pouch to his publisher in London. Let me share just two of them with you. They exiled me to the heart of the jungle, wishing to fertilize the shrubs with my remains. But I became an expert hunter and came out with snake wisdom and rhino fierceness. They sent me into the ocean, wishing I would never return from the depths. But I became a deep sea diver and came up with many scintillating pearls. On October 9th, 2012, Nguyen Tri Chien died, but his words, published in the form of Voices of Hell, live on. He's the Solzhenitsyn of Vietnam. Keep in mind his words and his inspiration. Lawmakers, members of the LEA, and those of us who report on you, continue to go out and do your mission. Develop and face problems with rhino fierceness and snake wisdom, and you will come up with many scintillating pearls. As conservatives, as LEA friends and supporters, you can do no less. Thank you and good night. Answer, as well as Tony did, to the press corps and to the world. So, questions? Anyway.
Questions for the distinguished gentleman from Newsmax? Questions, anyone?
Don't everybody jump at once.
No. Ma'am.
You gotta raise your hand. You think Trump will pardon Julian Assange and Snowden?
No, I do not. There's a strong movement for that, by the way, and I've certainly heard Ron Paul call Julian Assange and Edward Snowden American heroes. In fact, Julian Assange beamed in to Ron Paul's 80th birthday party, calling him a great man and the like. But at the same time, there comes a very big risk in doing that, and that is that that's going to encourage other people to become whistleblowers with top secret material. So I do not believe he will pardon them. Then again, he pardoned he commuted the sentence, I should say, of former Governor Blagojevich today, and he may well do it with Roger Stone. So you just really never know what you're going to get when you say the words Trump and pardon together.
Other questions for Representative Woodhouse?
So it appears that the newest public figure target seems to be Attorney General Barr.
Yes.
What's your appraisal of that situation?
He's going to be in that position for the rest of the administration and throughout a second term if he wants it. And let me tell you why. I spoke to a good source in the Justice Department who reminded me 1,000 former Justice Department officials signed a letter criticizing him. Most of those are people who worked under Democrats and burrowed in because Republicans could never get their own to take the career jobs. The Democrats, on the other hand, are perfectly willing to do it. Now he has 97% of the assistant attorneys general and bureau chiefs picked by him, picked by President Trump rather, with his encouragement. Nearly all of the 94 U.S. attorneys have been picked under General Barr. In other words, he's not going to have anyone undercutting him, and he has the president's confidence. So I think that's one reason he's a target, and I find it very amusing, and I'll tell you why. This is not a Trump creation, not a Trump ally. As a matter of fact, William P. Barr is a creation of the late President George H.W. Bush, who made him Assistant Attorney General in charge of the Office of Legal Counsel, Deputy Attorney General, and Attorney General, all before his 41st birthday. He's a Bushman and the embodiment of an establishment Republican, and yet he believes in serving the president who appoints him, and therefore he's being criticized for it. I find that most amusing that his past and his history is never discussed at all. By the way, he's also a superb bagpipe player, among other things. Okay, anybody else? Sir?
Were you on an interview with Walter Hudson a little while back?
Yes.
I thought I remember you saying that John Bolton wouldn't testify or wouldn't give up stuff about the Trump administration?
I cited people who were close to Ambassador Bolton, and all of them said that no matter what was said out there, he would not only refuse to undercut the president, his testimony would help him in the end. And I can tell you, these are people who knew him. This includes David Keene, past president of the National Rifle Association, who hired him as an intern during the Nixon administration, and Bruce Hershenson, best man at my wedding, who teaches at Pepperdine University, who was a supporter of the John Bolton for President movement. These are people who know him well and have said that whatever he may say in private, when it comes to testimony, he would not push the president into the sea. And they said have confidence in him.
So you're confident that if he testified, which you think he said he would have, it wouldn't
Yes.
have been negative?
I'm confident that people that I've known a long time who have a relationship with him have assured me he wouldn't say those things.
Okay.
Well, I sound like I'm testifying. Thank you. Don, you had a question back there. Get that to Don.
I'm just kind of curious, your opinion of the tone in Washington. I'm recently reminded that the Minnesota Constitution, when it was put together, the Democrats and the Republicans in the state would not speak to each other, so they had to sign 2 separate copies of the Constitution and then knit them back together. This is division that we don't see here. People talk about it so divisive, so horrible now. In your opinion, you've got a long career. Do you think it's worse, better, particularly horrible?
No.
What do you think?
I guess when you've been around and you've seen so much, nothing surprises you anymore. We go through times when people have disagreements and can get a little ferocious with it. But we've always had times like that. If you look back at Abraham Lincoln and look at the things said about him when he ran for president and ran for re-election, they're as bad, if not worse, than said about this president. In October of 1948, the New York Times on page 1, Truman likens Dewey, his Republican opponent, to Nazis. And that is an absolute true headline. You have fierce rhetoric, and it only seems a little more intent now because we have the social media that's out there. The fact is that if you're on Twitter, if you're on Facebook, I don't know about Instagram photographs, but if you're on any of these things, then it is very difficult to avoid getting invective and very harsh language about politicians or anyone. I went on Twitter primarily because an editor insisted I do it, and I rather enjoy it, and I learn a lot of things about it. I also know that I can get pilloried for things, particularly any kind of article that's controversial. So I think it's about as bad as any times were, it's about as good as any times were. We just feel it a little more because we live in the age of social media. Andrew.
Hi there, nice to meet you. Do you know anything about Congressman Tim Murphy with his Iranian secret deal that they were trying to do?
Now say the name again.
Tim Murphy, Congressman from Connecticut?
But you're talking about Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut?
Yes, please, sorry about that.
No, I'm afraid I don't, and I'm sorry to say the Nutmeg State is my home state, and I'm not familiar with it, but I would just simply say that in Connecticut, as in California, this is a state that is moving more democratic. It's much more democratic than Minnesota is, and you are going to find intense dislike for Trump and opposition to him coming from just about everyone there. You're talking about a state that has not sent a Republican to Congress since 2008. And I can say that because I'm from Connecticut. Yes, sir. Ben? Yeah.
Yeah, my question is, sorry. My question is about self-awareness. I often wonder if the press, I was trying to use my outside voice, but I guess it wasn't enough. If the press is aware of the perception that's out there, because they have, you talk about anonymous sources and they don't seem very concerned about their credibility. They don't, and it's as if we are supposed to just believe them because they are in those positions. I'm reminded of, I visited Congress in 1986, and I can't remember the players anymore, but I was in the, up above in the balcony, and someone said about my good friend who was from the other side, and they went on about how they loved him and cared for him and all that, and I broke out laughing. And they said there'd be no laughing in the balcony. It was incredible. And I guess I'm wondering, does the press know how hard they need to fight for credibility?
Absolutely. I think the fact that so much is televised and so much is online, you cannot be unaware of that. And I would just say that many of my colleagues out there do not pretend not to be opiners and things. And that's fine. But with that comes the fact that they're going to get opposition. Speaking for myself, I like to just report the news. It's a great thrill to me to discover something that people don't know in advance. John mentioned Alan Riskin, my friend and mentor, our old editor, who used to infuriate me when he would say, I know this already. He said, everybody knows this. Tell me something I don't know. But he was absolutely right, and that's what I like to pursue. Now, if you are going to be an editorialist and an opiner, then you're going to get some kind of opposition. And this is why many stories and things on blogs have room for a response. And I read some of the response. It's pretty rough stuff. I would just say, choose what you want to be, but then accept the consequences of it. Yes?
Two hypotheticals. Should Trump win re-election and Nancy Pelosi is still Speaker, will the Democrats impeach Trump again?
No. I mean, they can figure out very easily that this one was a dud, basically. It did not sell. And Nancy Pelosi spoke at the Christian Science Monitor breakfast. I was seated one seat away from her, and she was asked, do you want to see Donald Trump impeached? And she said, no, I want to see him defeated and sent to jail. It's all red meat for the supporters, but it wasn't enough red meat. She changed her view when she let AOC and Congresswoman Ilhan Abdullahi Omar push her too much. She's always got to defend her left flank all the time, because eventually there's going to be a challenge. Nancy Pelosi is going to be 80 years old next month. She was a graduate of Trinity School in Washington when Pat Buchanan was graduating from Gonzaga Boys School, and I know how old both of them are. Steny Hoyer, the majority leader, 80 years old. Jim Clyburn, the whip, is 81. The stage is set for someone younger and farther to the left to take over. And I would just say that if that is the case, I hope they have learned their lesson, because this did not help Democrats in any way, and it certainly is not helping the eventual Democratic nominee for president. And if you think that's a partisan view, I would say the same thing about Republicans pursuing the impeachment of Bill Clinton. You'd be hard-pressed to find anyone today who thought that was a good move to continue the impeachment when the Democrats nearly took over the House in 1998 and strengthened his hand for the 2000 elections. What's your other hypothetical?
No, the hypothetical was Trump and Pelosi still being...
John and Jeremy both have questions over there.
Thank you. Given what happened last election cycle between Bernie Sanders, say it out loud Sanders, and Hillary Clinton, what do you think your appetite for the Democrats is for a Bernie Sanders nominee, given the superdelegates and how they run their deal there?
Representative Heinrich, the superdelegates are barred from voting on the first ballot of the Democratic Convention. This was the rules change that was given to the Sanders supporters after the convention, ostensibly to bring them on board with Hillary Clinton. When I was riding with Gordon today, I had a phone call from Don Fowler, one of the two oldest living former Democratic chairman, who's from South Carolina, and he was one of those who opposed the change but believes it should stay in place. So the superdelegates will not be there. I've just been in Iowa and I've been in New Hampshire, and since you brought the question up, I will tell you this. Bernie Sanders is in the position that Ronald Reagan was on the Republican side in 1980. He nearly won the nomination against the establishment favorite 4 years earlier. His supporters were wired, many of them accused of sitting on their hands and letting the other party win. They're coming back very strong right now, and he did very well in Iowa. He won the popular vote. He won New Hampshire. He's ahead in Nevada right now. And Mr. Fowler from South Carolina said he's strong in the Palmetto State. I would say he gets to Super Tuesday. Michael Bloomberg can spend all the money he wants, $350 million. A lot of that can be undone by one more comment about teaching the farmers, or like in Putin's annexation of Crimea to the U.S. annexation of California. That kind of talk is just not going to sell well. I think I would not bet the farm, but I bet several acres the Democratic nominee will be Bernie Sanders. And if Bernie is a pragmatic and sharp politician, he'll pick as his running mate, Amy Klobuchar.
Only way we get rid of her.
Jeremy, you had a question.
Well, yeah, John, I was going to ask the same question and what the odds were on a brokered convention at the DNC, so that was kind of the same. And maybe on the rumor that Hillary Clinton could come out of the brokered convention.
Well, as Donald Trump said when asked about facing Hillary Clinton again, thank you, God. The idea of a brokered convention or even a multi-ballot convention is out of the question. It's like dusting off an old movie, quite frankly, to watch, or colorizing a movie. The last time a convention went over one ballot was 1956. And that's when Adlai Stevenson, the Democratic nominee, threw open the selection of his running mate to the delegates. And Tennessee Senator Estes Kefauver narrowly beat the young Senator John Kennedy from Massachusetts for the nomination. And it was all very exciting to watch, very spontaneous. It was also the time when delegates were chosen by parties in most states and operated as free agents and individuals. Hence, you could have the brokering, as you put it. Now, most of them are legally instructed by their parties, or more so by states in response to primaries. So 85% of the delegates will be selected by March 5th, Super Tuesday. And if that is the case, then I would say the chances are a nominee will have been selected by then. This gentleman, the former candidate for governor against Norm Coleman, wants to ask me a question.
Well, she wants to ask a question.
Oh, ma'am, Marcia.
Thank you. So we've seen a lot of journalism decline, real journalism decline over the years. And I come from Duluth, Minnesota, that has a one-horse piece of paper that we see an opinion article on the front page as news instead of in the editorial column. So this so-called journalist is making his opinion on the front page. What are the chances of turning the direction that journalism has gone in the indoctrination system, which is our colleges and our lower education? What is the chance of changing that direction in the next few years? Are there colleges that are actually teaching journalism, or are they all falling into the same ideology of, it's my opinion I want out there, it's all about me, it's not about the true story? Do you
You've just given
understand?
me an opportunity, Marcia, to underscore something that John touched on. I met him because of the National Journalism Center, which I'm now on the board of, and I can tell you, the young people who are coming up and want to be real journalists, shoe leather journalists, are growing. Now, a lot of that means that they have to understand that there is no ideology in that kind of journalism, that it's just basic shoe leather. Somebody was saying once, how did you uncover that the Secretary of Labor was out? And I said, a lot of shoe leather and a lot of lunches. And that's where these young people are coming from. You don't hear of them because you hear more, I think, about people who want to be future Woodward and Bernsteins, who want to be sexy journalists. It's interesting. So many people in the 1950s and 60s wanted to be lawyers because they loved watching Perry Mason on TV. And then, of course, you saw a lot of women join police forces after Angie Dickinson was the policewoman. And then Woodward and Bernstein were glamorized as reporters. One of the least glamorous businesses, I might add, that you could ever encounter. And they want to be like them. And hence you have the gotcha journalism, the idea of the journalism as the pundit on the Sunday talk shows and the like. Well, I say to you that the people who are going to the journalism center that I know, they may not be in a majority, but they are numerous, and there will always be people who want to be out there, who take up the words and admonition of Daniel Webster, that there is nothing so powerful as the truth. Yes, sir.
I have no doubt that you're maybe right about Bernie Sanders being a nominee, but I just have this suspicion that Bloomberg isn't going to give up so easily and may run in a primary. And if he does slide Hillary in there, it might be wild.
Okay, this being in Minnesota, let me tell you, sliding a candidate in or a nominee from a brokered convention are impossible. It's like drawing blood from a rock, basically. Look, 1968 was the last time someone was nominated who had never entered a single primary or won any delegates competing in the primaries. And you know who that was? Hubert Humphrey. That is now illegal under Democratic rules. You have to have competed in primaries, you have to have delegates elected in primaries, or you cannot be put in nomination for president. So Hillary Clinton cannot come out of a convention and cannot be slid in. Voters are not going to tolerate that anymore. Look, the Democratic Party is headed toward an eventual national primary. I saw that a former Democratic chairman the other day called on Nevada to end its caucus and go for a primary system. I don't know if they'll do that or not. I don't know if the state of Nevada can afford a primary system because you pay for this. The taxpayers when you do it. But the idea of sliding someone in who doesn't compete in the process is out of the question.
Maybe in the election later, to file against.
File as an independent, I think is what he's trying to say.
Oh, as an independent? Many of the deadlines to be on the November ballot have passed already. Usually if someone is going to do that, a Ross Perot, say, or the Libertarian Party, they either have to have presence on the ballot or they have to begin a process with petitions to get on the ballot. And that's become harder over the years. Individual states have made it more difficult to get third party or independent candidates on the ballot. Perot could do it because he planned early and had the money. I don't know that Hillary Clinton could.
Unless your name is Tom.
I see some people from Greater Minnesota have a long way to go to get back home yet tonight and might be
Sure.
fighting off some fatigue, but if they put the presidential seal up here and try to reinstitute the press conferences, I think this guy could handle it, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
That's good. Let's thank Ken Gizzzi for coming here tonight. Thank you all.